Welcome to the Shift podcast, where we talk about the future of work and interesting things related to automation and artificial intelligence, generative AI. Every week we talk with Ashwin Kadaru, CTO of Simply Augmented, where we explore news of the week, also issues related to automation and generative AI. I'm really excited to talk to him today about some use cases related to Gen AI and automation in general. So let's get to it. Ashwin, welcome. Thanks for being on.
Pleasure to be here again.
So today I want to talk a little bit about generative AI, and I want to start by giving people a better understanding of what it actually is.
Yeah, so maybe we start at the highest level and we'll kind of peel the onion all the way down. So the first term is artificial intelligence. I think many people have heard about this. It's AI. It is our umbrella term for any software that we create that is essentially making machines smarter. Can we create smart software? And the end goal being, can we make machines so smart that they can mimic human intelligence? So that's at our highest level. If we dig down one layer deeper, we reach machine learning. And machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. And it's pretty much like trying to teach a child how to learn from experiences. And so a child can learn what a dog is, what a cat is, and then determine which one is which when it sees a image of a dog or a cat. So the child is essentially making a prediction based on what they see. It's a dog or it's a cat. Now, peel the layer, another layer down, we get deep learning. And so deep learning is a subset of machine learning. And it's like having a child recognize a dog or cat by themselves. And so maybe you show them some information before, and then they see an animal they've never seen before. And they have to identify, well, is it a dog? Is it a cat? Is it something else? And so that's a layer of deeper learning. And then we go down one more layer into generative AI. And generative AI is essentially AI that can create its own content. And so here, a child maybe sees a bunch of different pictures online and then can draw their own picture by themselves.
So all the hype and talk right now is around generative AI. And it's been almost 8 months of nonstop chatter about this particular element of AI. And we both know that AI has been around for a long time. But let's dig in and talk about why there's so much energy and excitement around generative AI. And it might be a good place to start. Just kind of take us back a little bit and talk about the history.
Yeah, so like you said, AI has been around for a while. This isn't anything new. Generative AI has also kind of been around for a while, but it hasn't been very impactful or useful in its early stages. And so sometime back in 2017, there was a paper published called Attention is All That Matters. And that was by a lot of researchers from Google. And that introduced a new architecture called a transformer. And a transformer is what a lot of the large language models that you see today is built on top of. But how did we get to this hype cycle? So OpenAI has been a big player in the pushing of large language models and generative AI. But they're not the only people in this space. They are the ones who have kind of pushed us towards this hype, but a lot of the big tech companies and big companies in general have been doing this for years. So let's stick with OpenAI for now, because they're kind of what kicked this all off. OpenAI took their paper, Attention is All That Matters, or Attention is All That You Need, and they created a version called GPT-1. And this is a generative pre-trained transformer, and it's version 1 of it. Version 1 could not do much. I think there was something like 110 million parameters, and that really all that means is that's how big the neural network, the model itself was. That model is going to grow over time. But they started with around 110 million parameters, and it was trained on something like 4.5 gigabytes of text data. Then they introduced GPT-2. GPT-2 was about 1.5 billion parameters, so a significant increase in size of the model itself. And it was trained on about 40 gigabytes worth of text. So again, more training and a bigger model. Finally, around 2020, we got GPT-3, which is closer to where we are today. And that was something around like 175 billion parameters and trained on something like 350-ish terabytes of text data. Now, when ChatGPT released, OpenAI worked on GPT 3.5. And really what 3.5 was similar to 3, but a lot of training was done by a human. So it was reinforcement learning through human feedback. And so humans would go and essentially tell the model, I like this answer versus this answer, or this is a question and answer pairing. And humans would go and do that work. And what they were doing was fine tuning the model, GPT-3, to get to a state where the model is helpful and you can have a chat or a conversation with it. And that's what GPT 3.5 was, and that's what ChatGPT was launched with.
It was my understanding that that moment in time when humans were able to train the model was a huge step up in the quality of the content that was coming out of GPT 3.5. Is that true?
Yeah. And you can think of it like a large language model. Maybe GPT-3 was just a lot of raw power, but it had no direction. What the fine tuning did was it allowed to almost align the large language model to what we want it to do. And that's what a lot of fine tuning is you're tuning some kind of raw potential, if you will, to do a specific task. And in this scenario, it's chatting and being a helpful assistant to humans. And then finally, to wrap this up, we ended in 2023, OpenAI announced GPT-4. And this is a significantly bigger model. I don't think they've released the actual parameters and the amount of data it was trained on, but you can imagine it's a significant order of magnitude more than GPT-3.
So that's really interesting, hearing about GPT-4 and where things have come from. Where are we at now? And when business leaders think about the situation that we find ourselves in, everyone I talk to is very, very excited about these opportunities that come with automation and generative AI, but they're not sure how to proceed. And they're not sure if they're going to have to change the existing tools that they already have. Do they get to keep the existing tools that they already have? I'm excited about being able to build on top of existing stacks like Salesforce, Microsoft, Google, the big players who are going to build foundational elements to their platforms that allow for a lot of these plugins and things to exist. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how you are able to build within existing platforms to make all of this work rather than just having to buy hundreds of point solutions.
Yeah. And so maybe I'll start with a question directed towards business owners and even people who are building product. Do you like using hundreds of different products for different things, or would you rather have 10 solid products that can do those 100 things? And the reason I say this is because we're in a hype cycle right now, and you'll see a ton of AI startups out there, and they all have their own products, and they could be effective. But at the end of the day, for a business, you don't want to be managing hundreds of different tools. I think the end goal here for a lot of this AI generated content or AI in general for your business is, can we integrate AI in a backend or under the hood and just continue to leverage current investments that you have? If you're using something like Salesforce or Zendesk or Jira or whatever it is, let's not add another tool to the toolbox. Let's instead use AI in conjunction with your existing tools. And I think that's the approach that we should take. And so companies that have invested heavily in software like Salesforce or Zendesk or Jira, you'll start to notice, one, those investments, those companies like Salesforce, they're already looking into AI. So you can kind of build on top of what they're already building for your specific use case. But before you do any of that, you really have to think about what is your AI strategy, because AI can be one of those things that can affect every part of your business. And you don't want to do things necessarily in a silo. You want to make sure things flow together and work together well. And to get to even to that point, you have to make sure that the data in your company is organized and you are ready to integrate AI tools. And so there's this progression of step zero really is understand what data you have available, what tools are you using today, what does the process look like today, and is your data even ready to be used in an AI solution? Then you can go and say, look at my existing tools, what are my existing processes, and how can I add AI in between those things so it can make it significantly better than it is today? You could go and buy AI tools, but you may reach a point where you have too many and you want things to be integrated into one single location. And I think this end goal is really interesting, where I can sit inside of a chat for the entire day, whether it's Microsoft Teams or it's Slack or it's whatever it is. And I can just have these AI agents that go do different things for me. And my entire day consists of me staying in one tool, but that one tool is integrated with many different softwares.
It goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, is understanding what tool we're using. Is it just artificial intelligence and deep learning? Is it generative AI? Are you creating content? Is it automation? Are you asking the AI agent to do something and then it goes and does it and it brings you back the results? Those are very different, and understanding what that is can tell you where you are in the process. Everything is not just generative AI because that happens to be the hype and the buzz right now. You have to pick your tools correctly.
Right. And whatever process you land on that you want to implement AI in, remember that Specifically, if we talk about large language models or even image generation, it's only one piece of the puzzle. You still have the entire rest of the solution to build out, whether it's automation, a data pipeline, some other front end software, whatever it is, that doesn't go away. Your large language model, your generative AI portion is just one new Lego block that you can play with.
Who are some of the big players right now that we should be thinking about that are in the space that are establishing these big foundational elements for what we're doing here?
Yeah, there's a lot of companies leveraging foundational elements, but let's talk about the foundational players themselves, the ones who are actually researching and investing in the large language models and the infrastructure. So, very clearly, OpenAI is one of these bigger players, and they partnered with Microsoft and Azure to make sure that OpenAI's models can be used for businesses and on top of Azure's infrastructure. So, it can scale well and it has the enterprise grade security. But you do have companies like Google also looking into Google and Meta both creating their own models, whether it's Llama, which is Meta, and Google has things like Bard, which is their chat, but they have their own large language models and other models. They're some of the bigger players that you should keep an eye on as well. And I don't think we're going to reach a place where there's one AI to rule them all. In fact, I think there should be multiple large language models and multiple people creating models, foundational models in the future. So that's on the text generation front. But on image generation, again, you have OpenAI, you have companies like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, all working on this image generation front.
Let's go a little bit deeper for all the nerds out there that want to hear a little bit more technically about what this all really means for them as they try to implement some of these tools and tool sets. What are some of the important notes to know about generative AI, like high level, like top 5, top 6 things to think about as you are, perhaps being asked by your boss or somebody in leadership to think about and then implement AI and generative AI in your company?
Yeah, I'll start with number one. Large language models is not search. It was not built to be search, even though it has capabilities like ChatGPT has a capability to go search on Bing. And a large language model by itself has some information, but I wouldn't use it as a search. They're different things. You may use Google search for one thing or Bing search for something, and you may use a large language model for another thing. It gets powerful when you combine those two together. You have a large language model that can summarize, read, and give you points that you're interested in. You can chat with it, but it's grounded in actual search information. And so if you're going to build some kind of solution, remember that a large language model is powerful, but you should connect it to other data sources, essentially searching for more other information, to make sure that it's grounded and not hallucinating answers and it gives you what you actually want. The second thing is you hear this very often. It's around the prompt engineering and, in general, garbage in, garbage out. I think this is very important as we start to move into solutions that are specific for certain tasks where you need a very specific outcome. And an example could be, we'll get into deeper examples later, but if you're a customer support agent and you have an email coming in and you need to respond to some customer in a certain tone, there's a certain way you need to do that. And to get a result for a large language model to generate that content, you have to give it a lot of instructions. And so you're going to get into this space where you're going to spend a lot of time creating a prompt or engineering a prompt. So it goes back to that top line, garbage in, garbage out. The third thing is training large language models or training models themselves is hard. I've heard a couple people already say, well, do I have to use OpenAI foundation models? Can I just build my own and use my own? And the answer is you could, but it's very technically challenging and very expensive. I think for something like OpenAI, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars training their models. And that's for the infrastructure. There was this comparison that if you tried to train something like GPT-3 on a single GPU, it would take you like 330 years. And so you really need the infrastructure to train out these models. Not only that, there's a lot of time spent cleaning the data. We talked briefly about you need to give this raw potential some direction. Well, let's say you got the infrastructure and let's say you did have the data, you still have to train the data and fine tune the model and make sure there's safeguards in place. So I wouldn't recommend trying to build your own model. Instead, I would take an existing foundational model and you can fine tune it with your specific needs. That's much easier because you have a base model that has security and safeguards in place, and you are fine tuning it for your specific use case. Fourth is, I think you've seen this as well many times, large language models tend to hallucinate and they can be wrong. And this is especially true when you don't have that grounding of information, whether it's search or you're searching internally for some kind of data. You may notice that a large language model will tell you something that is wrong, but they'll do it very confidently. Almost like you can't even tell that they were wrong in the first place. And so in good practice is one, ground your prompt in the sense that if you're going to ask a question, Ask a question, but maybe provide some facts. And that could be through an API, that could be through internal search, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But make sure you're getting accurate information out. Fifth is the hype. We talked about this. There's a lot of hype around this. And just be careful about what tools you adopt, what services that you use. There's a chance that the thing that you're exploring today may not exist tomorrow. And lastly, AI isn't new. Again, we talked about this before. AI has been around for a while, and it is the generative AI specifically is a shiny new object. And just be careful with how you implement it, and that you're doing it in an area where there's actual value, there's actual pain, and generative AI can solve that. Don't try to just implement it for the sake of implementing it.
I want to go back to number 3, training the model. I think there's a misconception that companies are going to create their own LLMs, and that's expensive and time consuming, and it doesn't seem like that is the right approach. But I want to flesh out the process for using an existing LLM, but training it on your data, because ultimately that's what all businesses want. And I think there's some misconceptions out there about how to do that. So let's imagine that you have a ton of unstructured and structured data in your company and you want to talk to it. At a very high level, can you talk about how you would set that up?
Yeah, and there is a common misconception between people say they want to train a model on their business data. And you don't actually want to do that. What you want to do is a pattern called retrieval augmented generation. And essentially, you're using a large language model as your base, but you're feeding it, you're injecting bits of information that it can use to answer your question. So, what do I mean? What is my company's policy on parental leave? A large language model alone obviously won't know that. But what you do on the back end is when a user writes that query and hits send, before you actually send that query to a large language model, you do a search internally and look at your policy. And so you retrieve your company's policy around that. You inject it into the prompt as context for the large language model. You package that whole prompt up. You send it to the large language model. Large language model now understands the question. It has the context. Maybe you give it some additional examples of how you want it to look, and it sends you back an answer that is grounded in truth and in fact.
I see.
The other part is the fine tuning. So fine tuning is something you still want to do, but fine tuning is more about how the large language model should output a result or the tone that the result is in. It's not necessarily you're training a model on your company's knowledge. You are trying to get it to say please and thank you. You're trying to get it to write a response in a certain format. You're trying to do something that is not necessarily about information, but more about how the large language model speaks to you. And so an example of this is just, I need to give a lot of input of angry customers. And when you have an angry customer, I want the response or the format and the tone to look a certain way. And so you want to have these inputs and output training data to fine tune your model and say, whenever you see this kind of input, I want you to act in this manner. And you run thousands of different data sets inside of a model to fine tune it, and you will get a better model for that specific use case.
I think that's a nice way to think about it because it's really context and style and prompt engineering. In the back end, what's happening is you're using an existing LLM, but you're providing a lot of context and instruction on how to answer my question. And the user just asks the question.
Yeah.
But because of this mega prompting, back-end prompting, whatever you want to call it, it is answering you in a knowledgeable way because it's looking at your data and in a way that is appropriate because you've told it the way that you want to respond.
Exactly.
I really like that. Let's jump to security and privacy. This is another one of those things that I hear all the time from people. I don't want my AI trained on my company data. I'm nervous about that. What if my employees input sensitive information into the AI tool? Will it leak out? What if the AI makes a wrong decision, and how will I be affected, legally by that? These are all things that I hear again and again and again from people. Can we address some of that and do it in the context of how you think about security, how you think about security in the context of foundational tools that are making this easy for us?
Yeah, let's start with one of the big ones, which is I don't want my company data, even my personal data, to be used to train a model. And so in a business scenario, we'll stick with OpenAI and Azure for now because they're the ones kind of pushing a lot of this in the enterprise. There, you can deploy essentially your own version of the large language model that you can fine tune and only your company has access to. And now what you do is you don't use a public platform like a ChatGPT or a Bard or a Bing. Instead, you use your own internal version of a large language model that could be fine-tuned for specific use cases, but is now inside of your cloud environment, let's say. And so, one, you're not, when you send out a query, you can control, like, you're not going to fine tune the model anymore unless you put the controls to do that. So the model won't actually be fine tuned on your data. But two, you just have full control now of the end to end experience. And it's inside of your firewall, inside of your company. And you don't have to worry about an AI model being trained on your data, which the real concern there is that I don't want the model to be trained on my data so that my competitors ask the same question and get a similar result or figure out what I'm doing. So that won't happen. That's a big thing that we've been hearing. The second thing is, what if my employees input sensitive information, or what if my employees do something they shouldn't be doing with large language model? Because it is a little bit of the wild, wild west. It's not like other technology. This is, you can do anything. You can ask it anything. And so there are tools now to filter out and control what goes into a large language model and what comes out of it. And so there are two separate filters, and they can be controlled by IT admins. The first filter is, before a prompt even gets to the large language model, you have essentially a filter in there that checks for maybe like a harassment or maybe violence or maybe any kind of content you don't want and you deem inappropriate. You can say this content is not appropriate and it doesn't ever hit the large language model. That's on the input side. On the output side now, again, IT admins can control this. The large language model gets some information and it generates some kind of response. That response may be something you don't want to have enter into your company, or you don't want to have your employees even seeing. And so you could put a filter there that kind of also stops it on that side of the fence. And so on both of these sides, you have safeguards that prevent your employee from abusing or using the tool that you don't want them, or you don't want them to be using it like that. Another one is, what if an AI agent makes a wrong decision on my behalf? And this is more when we talk about delegation agents. And delegation agents meaning you say, go do a task for me, and the AI agent just goes and does it for you. The big thing here is we really want to keep in with this theme that's called human in the loop. And you'll hear it very often. A lot of companies talk about it. And what that really means is, if I do go and use a delegation agent and I say, go do this task for me, before it actually does that task, it'll give me a script or something to review. Like, this is what I'm going to go do. This is maybe how I'm going to go do it. Do you approve? And that, in that way, if you build all your solutions like that, the human is always the final approver. Kind of like how you have an executive or a project manager as the final approver, and you have your engineers or your assistants, whatever, go off and do work. Your AI agent will function the same way. And so you get to control and review and say, no, don't do this, or no, review this or tweak this a certain way, and then go send the agent off to go do some work. And then finally, will IT admins have control of the solution? And this goes back to, if you deploy these models in-house and deploy your solutions end-to-end in-house, it's essentially your IT admins control the functionality, controls the data, controls anything that they need to meet enterprise security.
I really like the notion of keeping people in the loop. And I want to explore that a little bit more, because in the media right now, there's a lot of talk about people losing their jobs. People are scared of AI. There's a lot of doomsday scenarios. And I think philosophically, I believe that we should always have people in the loop, and those people should be trained on how to use these tools appropriately. But if they are, they're going to have jobs for a really long time. And so when you think about the ways that people can prepare for that reality, when yes, AI is doing a lot of things for you every day, but you are the ultimate arbiter of what goes out the door.
Yeah, I have a couple of analogies, but before I get there, I want to talk about, like, you really do need to learn how to use some of these tools, and they're not actually going to replace your jobs. And let me try to bring some calm to that first. If you've ever tried an image generation like a Dolly or like a Midjourney, that stuff is hard. Like, you can spend a lot of time prompting and still not get the thing that you want. So even though it's crazy technology and it can generate some pretty wild things, you still need a human there to prompt it for exactly what you need. And that's going to continue to be true, because we, at the top of this call, we talked about a large language model or a diffusion model as just raw potential and raw power. But at the end of the day, if you have to prompt it and you have to guide it to the solution you want or the thing that you want generated, that still takes a human. And it takes you need to learn how to prompt, essentially, or figure out how to use this tool to get the value from it. So that's one. Two, when people talk about AI will take my job, AI really is scaling individuals. It's making you do your jobs faster and maybe get rid of the monotonous work for you. And if it's on the creative side, it helps you get to that first draft significantly faster. And like I said, you still will just use that initial draft and move on and maybe do your normal work, but it's closing certain parts of your process. And now I always use this analogy. around if I was a company, would I cut my staff in half if I had AI tools that could do double the work, or would I increase my size of my employees? And the analogy that I like to use is if you gave me $1 and I gave you $2 back, that's great. You made an extra dollar. But if you gave me $1 and I instead gave you $10 back, would you start to only give me 50 cents? Or would you start to increase the amount of money you gave me because you're getting a 10 times value back? And we could think about this the same way as with employees. If you're an employer, do you cut your workforce in half if you're getting 10 times the output? Or do you say, okay, let me double down, triple down, because now my output is just increasing? You can get more done in a single year with an increased workforce. And so that's something to think about.
Yeah, it's especially true if on the revenue side of my business, I can get enough output to justify some of the other parts of my business. I'd give you $100, $1,000. I would do that deal all day long.
Exactly.
Ashwin, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate the time today. It's super interesting to talk about generative AI and kind of get a better understanding of exactly how it works. I really appreciate the time. It was great talking with you.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.